In UC 0085, the Titans began trials with the YRMS 106 Hyzak pre-production type. Despite misgivings over its looks, the unit would eventually be approved to fill the ranks of their rapidly expanding forces. One of these pre-production units would then end up with the Titans test team, and after trials of the machine itself were over, it would be modified into the Bizak TR2 Bigwig. The first test of this thing was scheduled for July 31st, UC 0085. And ironically enough, the pilot would be Karl Matsubara, the person who had previously been the most vocal about his disdain for the very Zaku-inspired looks of the Hyzak. Unfortunately for him though, his unit, the Gym Sniper 3, had been wrecked in a previous mission, so it's safe to say that this decision wasn't made to mess with him, but simply because it made the most logical sense. Still, Karl wasn't thrilled about the prospect of testing out this Bigwig, which he hadn't even seen yet. What he did know was that the specs looked pretty ridiculous on paper, but that was because he was expecting it to be a mobile suit and not a mobile armor. In fact, it was so big that it couldn't even fit inside of the hangar of the Oz-1, and it had to be secured to its hull. Yet another pain to deal with for Karl, who was already feeling under the weather. Regardless, he boarded the Bigwig and received the final briefing before the test. The unit was packing a very powerful main cannon, but its mobility was severely lowered, so he had to be careful. Elliot then asked him how he was feeling about his new unit, and in typical Karl style, he complained that he felt like a test rabbit, and then also told Elliot to be careful with his shield because he was going to be needing it later. Elliot did find it a bit funny that he was worried about his shield of all things at a time like this, but he didn't think too much about it. He told Karl he'd take care of it and signed off. Karl was now alone in the cockpit of the Bigwig with nothing else to do but wait for the cables that secured his Bigwig to disconnect. Was he going to be next? Images of his team leader almost being killed in the previous mission flashed through his mind. He tried to calm himself. I'm not afraid. With a loud snap, the cables disconnected and Karl snapped back into his usual persona. With the test flight underway, he had a duty to perform. They began looking for a target to fire at, and at the very edge of his sensor, Karl spotted an enemy blip, possibly the Zanzibar-class ship that attacked them earlier. At such a long range, it was no certainty that he'd hit, but it would be a good test of the functionality and the output of the cannon. The possibility of taking out some Xeon remnants and extracting some revenge was a nice added bonus. Karl took aim, fired, and nothing happened. So Karl began preparing for a second shot, but before he could do that, more blips appeared on his scanner. Something about them was wrong though. One of the blips turned out to be a civilian shuttle, and it was being surrounded by Hyzaks from the Alexandria. Unsure of what to do, Captain Murphy ordered Karl to hold so that they could see how this very confusing situation would play out. Shortly after this, the shuttle exploded. Presumably it was shot down by the Hyzaks surrounding it, who then immediately retreated. Captain Murphy decided that it was the best for his team to also retreat. The first test with the Bigwig had been a marginal success, but for its pilots, the day ended with a weird feeling. For many others though, July 31st would never end. And that was all for the first test flight of the Bigwig. While the unit itself was unscathed, the odd circumstances would certainly set a precedent for the luck of the Bigwig and its pilot. What I found very interesting here is that we got quite a bit of character development for the very boisterous Karl. When we were first introduced to him, he was a typical Titan. Arrogant and quick to start a fight with just about anyone he didn't like. Then he started forming a camaraderie with his fellow pilot Elliot, and now we saw how the stress and trauma of combat slowly begins to take its toll on him. And next time we'll be having a look at the second test flight of the Bigwig. And for anyone unaware of what July 31st Universal Century 0085 was, I'll have a link on screen and down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.